Good morning. I'm Will Pugh, and so I know Anita for a number of years, and she asked if I would give a little talk about Corporate Transparency Act, which is a new federal law that went into effect on January 1 of this year. And it's sort of a hassle, but it requires that pretty much every small business in the United States, I think it's something like over 33 million businesses, will have to file beneficial ownership information report. Let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and share a screen here because it maybe just be easier for everyone. And then at the end of this, if you guys have questions, I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the Corporate Transparency Act or, you know, small businesses generally. So let's see. Okay, can people see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So, so just quick overview, I already sort of mentioned, but this is a new law. It's really supposed to do something for anti-money laundering. Not really sure that it does anything like that, but that's the idea. And it's enforced by the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And it can actually give rise to criminal liability if you don't comply, both for reporting companies as well as beneficial owners who provide erroneous information or fail to provide information. So, as I said, the act went into effect January 1. Any company that was in existence prior to January 1 of this year has until the end of the year to file their report. Any company that was formed during this year, 2024, has 90 days to file their report. And then going forward in future years, you'll have 30 days to file from the date of formation. The reporting company, like I said, it's going to be most small entities, so LLCs, corporations, partnerships. In some states, it will even include trusts if the state that your trust was formed in requires that you file like a certificate of trust document. So it could include trusts as well, not in Arizona. And basically, I'm not going to get into the exceptions because I don't think it's going to apply to anybody here, but it's one of the few exceptions that some of you may have is if you've got over I think 20 employees and $5 million in annual revenue, then that would make you an excluded from having to be a reporting company. So what you need to do to comply is you have to provide beneficial ownership information for all the beneficial owners of the reporting company. And that analysis is going to flow through to if you have entity members or entity managers in an LLC, you're going to have to look through to those other sub entities to figure out whose information you need to provide. And essentially every single company that's a small entity has to provide beneficial ownership information of some sort. So there's no way that you can kind of try to, you know, circumvent this by, you know, making sub entities and sort of, you know, trying to figure out a way to avoid providing any information. So who has to provide this information? One, the person who forms the entity. So I got to provide beneficial ownership information, essentially, every time I form a company for a client. But also anyone who owns 25% or more of a reporting company, or anybody else who exercises substantial control. So that would include managers of a limited liability company, if it's manager managed. It would include directors in a corporation, as well as the C-suite executives. So like CEO, COO, CFO, those types of people. And like I said, let's say you form a limited liability company that has two LLCs as members. Okay. If those LLCs, if one of those LLCs, if those two LLCs have equal ownership interest, one of them has 4 members that own equal ownership interest in that LLC, and the other only has 2, the 2 people in the LLC that's only got 2, they'll be deemed to own 25% of the reporting company at the top. So you're going to have to provide information for those 2 people. The people on the other side that own 25% of a company that owns 50%, they're going to be deemed to own less than 25%. So you wouldn't have to provide their information at this upper reporting company level, but they're going to have to provide that information at the level of their LLC. And similarly, if you've got management of a limited liability company exercised by another limited liability company, you're going to have to figure out who is exercising control of that sub limited liability company. And so, I mean, all I can say is if you're trying to like create these sort of layers, you're really just going to complicate things for yourself, and you're ultimately probably going to have to do more filing of these things. If you are someone who owns, who's a beneficial owner of more than one of these companies, I strongly recommend that you go ahead and get yourself what's called a unique identifier number from FinCEN. Because one of the requirements under the Act is that you update your beneficial ownership information if it changes within 30 days. So if you move, so you have so let me back up. So beneficial ownership information, what is that? It's your legal name, it's your current residential address, it's a identifying number from an ID, like a state driver's license or US passport, and a copy of that ID. It has to be non-expired ID, and it has to the image has to be 4 megabytes or less to upload the thing to FinCEN. So if that information changes, and also your birth date. But if that information changes, obviously your birth date's not going to change. Probably your legal name is not going to change, although it may, I guess, if you are married and get married and change your last name or something like that. But if it changes, you have 30 days to update it. So if you have, if you're a beneficial owner in more than one entity, you're going to have to update it for each entity. But if you have a FinCEN identifier number, you can just update it the one time. And what you'll do is you'll use that FinCEN identifier number for each reporting company. That's all you need to provide. You don't need to upload your driver's license to every one of them. You just upload it once to get the identifier number. If you've already have like some kind of a global traveler card, global entry sort of thing, you probably already have a passcode to get to log in to get the beneficial ownership unique identifier. It's a similar, it's like, I think it's usgov.id or something like that, that'll link through there. But in any case, that will make it a lot easier if you've got more than one entity going forward, so you don't have to remember to update that with every entity that's out there. Let's see. So I provided a couple of links here. I'm happy to email this to anybody who's interested. Hopefully you can see my email address at the top. So if you want to send me an email, I'll send you a copy of this as a Word document or PDF, and so you'll have this to share with other people or whatever you want to do with it, and you'll have the links. There's been so recently, I just mentioned there was a ruling recently where the court said that they had injunctive relief about enforcement of the Corporate Transparency Act, but it only applies to members of the National Small Business Association, I think is the organization. So if you happen to be a member of the National Small Business Association, you may not need to be worrying about compliance today. But what I would say is doing the filing is actually not that hard. It takes probably 5 or 10 minutes or something. So, you can comply pretty easily. And, ultimately, it's probably easier to do that than to hope that you never have to do it and then find out that you do have to do it and you didn't do it. So, Yeah, that's about it. Let's see. Yeah, National Small Business Association is the entity. Anyway, so that's pretty much all I've got on this. Like I said, it's pretty straightforward. If you all have any questions, now would be the time to throw them my way.
All right. Thank you, Will. So we do have a question, a couple in there, and I have lots of questions. So can you reiterate a time frame for filing after the first file is in place this year?
Say that. I'm sorry, one more time.
So what is the time frame for filing after the first file? So if you are filing this year for your entity,
So this year you have 90 days. Once you form the entity, you have 90 days. So technically, if you formed a company on January 1st or 2nd, you're already not in compliance, right? Because we're more than 90 days out at this point. But you know, it's not really clear what's going to ultimately happen. Like I said, there's potential criminal liability, but how they're going to try to enforce this, you know, there's, like I said, 33 million existing companies, something like that. I mean, we don't really know what will happen and how it will be enforced and what the potential ramifications are. So all I can say is if you're forming a company this year, I would go ahead and go through this process and comply with the Corporate Transparency Act.
and then what about companies that have formed before this year? Because a lot of our companies formed last year or, you know, before that.
So if they formed prior to 2024, you have until the end of the year to come into compliance. So you just need to file your first reporting company report by the end of this year.
And then the only time to make changes is when your personal information changes. Is that correct? So it's not an annual reporting requirement.
No, it's not an annual reporting requirement. So each reporting company has to file this report. And if one of their beneficial owners' information changes, that beneficial owner needs to inform the company of the change and provide the information. And so you really, if you're somebody who's like, you know, the manager of the limited liability company who has other beneficial owners, you want to be sure you send them a letter and say, you know, letting them know what you need and informing them that they need to give you updated information if that information changes. You know, you might want to, if you might want to send an annual reminder to people if you're in that situation to let them know that, hey, if you've moved or you've got a new driver's license, you know, I'm going to need you to send me that information within 30 days so that I can, you know, provide it to FinCEN.
Another question is if you're a sole proprietor, so if you have, you know, I set up my LLC, I file as, you know, I didn't set it up as an S Corp. Do I also have to file? Is that considered a reporting entity?
Yeah. Even if it's just a single member limited liability company, I mean, I have one for my law practice. Yes, you have to file the beneficial ownership information report for the reporting company.
Okay. What if you have foreign owners in the company, non-US citizens?
So if they're you know, fall within that realm of beneficial owner, they have 25% or more, you're going to have to provide their information, including a copy of their foreign passport. And again, you know, one of the questions is, well, what happens when you have, you know, owners who don't have a passport? Maybe they don't travel, you know? I mean, so I guess if that happened, I think what I would recommend you do is you have your foreign owner send you some, you know, state ID, whatever it is, a driver's license, something. And if they don't have that, I don't really know what to tell you. I mean, it's like I said, the brand new law, so we're still kind of waiting to see how it all shakes out. But that's, yeah, bottom line is you need to provide that information.
Okay. I like the question from Tony. What about the inactive or dormant LLC, which I think they don't exist,
Yeah.
but
So
like I have one, I don't do anything with it. I
So
don't even have it.
inactive entities are excluded from having to report provide the beneficial ownership information. Although if you have to have been inactive, the company has to have been formed prior to January 1st, 2020. It has to not have been engaged in business or changed ownership in the past year or received $1,000 in the past year. It has to have no assets. And so again, one of the questions, like from a legal perspective, is what does that mean? No assets. I mean, if you have like a trade name, that would potentially be an asset. It may not be a physical asset, but it may have value. And so the law is not clear. It's a brand new statute. And you're supposed to file, I think, a report that says, yeah, we're exempt. So I'm not going to give you the beneficial owner's information because it's inactive. But it's, again, the law is not totally clear on what the ramifications of that might be. So one thing I would say is, if you've got inactive entities, you might want to think about dissolving them or terminating them this year. And I mean, even that technically may not satisfy the reporting requirement, but I think that if they said, hey, you should have filed a report and said you're exempt because it was in existence on January 1, and you say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I mean, I don't think there's going to really probably be any kind of recourse against you for that. But my recommendation would be go ahead and terminate those entities.
So this one is a good one too. Do you have to do that yourself, or can someone like your lawyer or your accountant do that for you?
Good question. So lawyer and accountant can do it for you, but a lawyer or an accountant cannot get you your own unique identifier. If you want to do that, you're going to need to do that yourself, and then you can provide that number to your lawyer or your accountant for filing the reports from the reporting companies for each reporting company.
Okay. What if you're not sure if you have 25 or 24% ownership in a company because their cap table is, screwy?
Well, I guess I would ask the company to let me know what's my ownership percentage.
Just throw
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, the cap table is going to be accurate and you'll know what your ownership percentage is. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, what's the question? The question is another question might be, what happens if my ownership percentage changes, right? And I
Right.
have 30% today, and by the end of the year, we've done a capital raise, and now I only own 20%. At the beginning of the year, you were a beneficial owner, and we were required to file. And do you need to provide that information, even though by the end of the year, when the report must have been filed by, you're no longer a beneficial owner? That is, again, there's a lot of gaps in the law. And so all I can say is, I would always err on the side of just, let's just go ahead and
Compliance.
apply and not worry about it. And if you've provided that information and then it turns out you're not a beneficial owner, I don't think there's any kind of potential downside to that.
Okay. Another question. What if the owner in the US entity is a non-US entity?
Okay, so again, same analysis is going to apply, and it also applies to foreign entities that have registered to do business in the United States. They also need to provide this information, so it isn't limited to U.S. entities. So if you've got a foreign owner, who is owns 25% or more, or an entity, you're going to have to look through and see if anybody in that foreign entity ultimately is going to be deemed to own 25% or more. Or if that foreign entity has some kind of management control or rights, you're going to have to figure out who at that entity can exercise that management control, right? So if, for example, if you had a foreign entity where none of the individuals in the entity own 25% or more, but it was a manager of the reporting company, then you would figure out, well, who at that foreign entity exercises management rights, because they're ultimately the manager of the reporting company. And you'd have to give that information.
There's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy. And the idea was, it's like an anti-money laundering statute, theoretically. But I mean, honestly, it's unclear to most of us how this can possibly help with anti-money laundering. For one thing, on the information that you're actually providing is pretty limited. It's your name, your birthday, and your address, and a copy of your driver's license. I mean, so it's like what you would provide when you check into a hotel, at any hotel overseas, pretty much. You check in, you give them your passport, and they look, they write it all down. So, um, it's more of a hassle than anything, but it's something that you should be compliant with.
Okay, is there anything that you hear from people they're worried about to do this? Like you said, we're already doing this, but I feel like, people are like just rolling their eyes, like, oh, one more thing. But other than that it's a nuisance.
Not really. It's not, the database is going to be not public facing, so it's not like anybody can go in there and sort of look to see. I have clients who, for whatever reason, they don't want people to know they own this entity or that entity, and so they form in a jurisdiction where that's not transparent. Arizona, you can look and see who the managers and owners are, or the 20% or greater owners are in like a limited liability company, for instance. But so it won't be public facing. It's for law enforcement. But if your brother-in-law is a cop, maybe they can look at it and see, oh, I see, Peter here owns 25% of this company. And I don't know, I don't think it's a huge issue, but no, I don't think that there's much to be worried about. I mean, probably it will, like most of these websites, eventually someone will hack it, but it's just got your name, and it's not, birthday and driver's license. It's not like your social security number or anything is out there. So.
And then, Will, you keep saying, there's consequences. I heard rumors there might be a fine. You're talking about criminal liability. Do we know if there's anything set up if you fail to do this?
We don't really know like what the potential ramifications are beyond, yes, there can be fines. But at the end of the day, it's like what they're saying now is that the initial action would be, hey, we see that you're not complying, you need to come into compliance, and you would have, I think, 30 days or something. The potential criminal liability for for like an individual who provides bad information, it's not really clear what they would really do. But again, it's like any money laundering, so they probably tack it on as something else, would be my guess.
Okay. And then just again for clarification, if I have I set up my Anita Consulting LLC, no matter how my tax filing is, and I don't have any income, in this year, I'm still required to get that reported, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So everybody here.
Yeah, so pretty much everybody here, is gonna have to file something.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are forming companies. They think it helps them. I mean, you have to file for a lot of reasons, but I think I have clients who form multiple entities thinking that it's really helping them in some way. And sometimes, when you start to talk to them about, well, why are you doing this? You realize that they're doing it in a way that doesn't necessarily make sense from a legal perspective or a tax perspective. And I think one thing that the Corporate Transparency Act will do is probably, curtail that to some degree.
Okay, let's see the injunction. So that was, can you say that again? Well, it was the Small Business Association, National.
It's the National Small Business Association filed a lawsuit to enjoin the enforcement of the Corporate Transparency Act. And the judge in that case ruled and granted a temporary injunction. So they didn't say the Corporate Transparency Act is unenforceable. What they said was, we're going to stop enforcement of the Corporate Transparency Act as to members of the National Small Business Association. Okay, so because they were the plaintiffs in that action. So the rest of us, we're just kind of out of luck. We have to comply. Those people, for the time being, don't have to comply. It's not clear whether if you joined now, whether that would apply to you. I wouldn't recommend doing that just to not comply. I think that probably the hassle of joining and the expense of joining, and there's no cost to comply with the Corporate Transparency Act. You know, doing the filing yourself takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes tops, and you know, then you're in compliance.
And then again, to reiterate, if you do the unique or universal, you for universal
Yes.
identifier at FinCEN, and I will send out to everybody who's on here, I will send out additional information when you file that. And then this is the number you use for your reporting of the different entities, then you're kind of done unless you form new entities or become co-owner at 25% or more of new entities.
Right. So there are two pieces, right? There's the beneficial ownership information. Getting the unique identifier number is like a replacement for that number is a replacement for all the beneficial ownership information. So you provide that one time, you get that number, and then for each reporting company that you're a beneficial owner of, you provide that number rather than your name, birthday,
All this stuff.
address, and copy of your driver's license. So it'll simplify the filing for the person doing the filing. And then in the future, the main thing in my mind is it'll simplify things if you move or get a new ID, because you only have to change it one time instead of like going through and changing.
Trying to remember. So it's a little bit like the W-9, right? When you work with independent contractors and you need a W-9, but they have an EIN, you know, so not exactly, but in my mind now, it clarifies it a little bit. You know, it's just something that needs to be done. You need to be diligent about it. And there is the more complex way, and then there's the easy way. But in the end, it's got to be done.
Yeah. And it's just like I said, I mean, it's a hassle, and it's not really clear, you know, what it's going to really accomplish. But,
yeah. But again, maybe it's just, you know, one database doesn't talk to the other. But okay, if you have any other questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. And if not, we can end early today.